At this time of year, which is to say Christmas, in England it is traditional to think about fairy tales and sometimes to go to the theatre to see what we call pantomimes performed of fairy tales. So this is a typical English fairy tale, and it's Jack and the Beanstalk. And this is how I will tell it to you. Long ago, in a land not far from here, there was a cottage, a poor cottage, in which there lived a widow woman and her son. And the widow woman and her son had very little money. They struggled to pay the rent every week on their poor little cottage. And things came to such a bad pass that the only thing they had left to sell to get money to pay rent on the small cottage was the cow. And of course it was the cow that gave them milk that they could sell to get money to pay the rent. So this was a desperate situation. And Jack waved sadly to his mother as he took the cow to market to sell her. As he was going down the road towards the town, Jack saw a cloud of dust coming towards him. And as the cloud of dust cleared, he saw an old man coming towards him. And the old man stopped before Jack and his cow and said, "Ah, my boy, that's a fine-looking cow you have there. Would you like to sell it?" And Jack said, "Well, actually, that's exactly what I want to do. I'm taking it to market to sell it. You see, we live in a poor cottage, but we have no money to pay the rent. And so this is the last thing we have to sell, our cow. And without her, we will have no milk. And without the milk, we will have nothing at all to sell. Not now, not ever." And the old man said, "Well, would you like me to buy the cow from you?" And Jack said, "Oh, well, that would save me going to market. What can you pay me? Can you pay me 1 week's rent? Maybe you could pay me 2 weeks' rent. Maybe you could pay me 3 weeks' rent." And the old man held up a little bag and said, "I can pay you this." "And what's in the bag?" said Jack. "Is it silver? Is it gold? Is it diamonds?" "No," said the old man. "It's beans." And Jack looked at the old man and at the little bag, and the old man continued before Jack could say anything that was rude about being offered a bag of beans for a cow. And the old man said, "Look, 5 beans. And I expect you are a young man who knows how many beans make 5. And Jack said, "Oh yes, 2 in each hand and 1 in the mouth. But beans for my cow?" "Ah," said the old man, "magic beans." "Magic beans," said Jack. "Magic beans," said the old man. "If you plant these in the ground, they will grow up to a height that will take you up to a magical kingdom where you will find your fortune." Now, you may think that Jack was a gullible boy, but he agreed to the deal, and he took the 5 beans from the old man, and he got a little bag as a bonus. And he took them back home, and his mother saw him coming up towards the cottage, and she ran out to him and said, "Oh, Jack, you've got rid of the cow, you've sold the cow. How much did you get for her? Did you get 1 week's rent?" And Jack said, "No." "Did you get 2 weeks' rent?" Jack said, "No." "Not 3 weeks' rent?" said his mother, and Jack said, "No, I got this." And she said, "A bag. Is it a bag of silver? Is it a bag of gold?" And Jack said, "No, it's a bag of beans. 5 beans. Because I know how many beans make 5. It's 2 in each hand and 1 in the mouth." And his mother looked at him and said, 5 beans. And Jack said, "Yeah, not just beans. They are magic beans. They are really magic beans. And if we plant them, they'll grow up and take me up to a kingdom that's magical. And there I will find my fortune." And his mother snatched the beans from his hand and threw them on the ground, and then used her foot to grind them into the earth. And she said, "You stupid child! What did I do wrong to bring such a fool into the world? We have nothing now, and now we are going to lose our home." And she went into the cottage, and Jack followed her, and they both went to their beds, and his mother slept fitfully in her anger. And Jack tried to sleep, but he struggled because of the noise that was coming through the window from the garden outside, the creaking and the groaning. And while Jack tried to sleep, the creaking and groaning continued as first a shoot appeared where the beans had been thrown. So that in the morning, where the beans had been thrown on the ground by Jack's mother, there was standing a giant beanstalk. And when Jack's mother came out in the morning into the poor garden that they had to see if she could find something for their breakfast, now, let me see, what can I well, I never did. Jack, come here. And Jack came running. What is it, mother? And she said, look up. And so he looked up. Never the brightest of boys. She said, look behind you and look up. Ooh. The beans were magic, said Jack. It's a magic beanstalk. It goes up to a kingdom where I will find my fortune. Oh, mother, I'm going to climb to the top of the beanstalk and find my fortune. And Jack's mother watched as Jack started to climb up the beanstalk. Up he went, higher and higher. Higher and higher and higher and higher until Jack came to the clouds. And the beanstalk went through the clouds, and so Jack continued to climb up, higher and higher through the clouds. Jack climbed up through the clouds. Up the beanstalk he went until he was standing on the clouds and looking out over a cloud kingdom. I wonder, said Jack, sitting down on the cloud, I wonder who lives here, whether there are any houses or castles or palaces. Now, if this was an English pantomime, you'd all be shouting, it's behind you. Oh, thank you. And he looked behind him, and there was a giant castle with giant doors. And so Jack jumped up and walked across to the castle doors, and he knocked on the doors, and then he heard footsteps coming towards him, and he stared in amazement as the castle door was opened. And there was standing a giant woman with a giant smile on her face. The giant's wife led Jack into the castle and into the kitchen. And she said, oh, you're so small, let me give you something to eat. But while Jack sat in a giant's chair waiting for something to eat, he and the woman heard a voice getting closer. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. And the giant woman said, oh, that's my husband. If he sees you, he'll gobble you up like a peanut. Oh, quick, hide. Where can you hide? Oh, the oven is cold at the moment. Go and hide it in the oven. Quickly, quickly. And so Jack went to the oven and he hid inside the oven and closed the door behind him, watching through the grate on the door of the oven. And then he saw the giant arrive. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. And his wife said, no, dear, no. That's the Englishman from yesterday. Remember yesterday's hot soup? Remember it was nice and meaty? It was that Englishman. We got cold cuts today. That's the smell you can smell. And the giant said, oh, all right then. Well, I shall just sit here
and wait for my lovely cold lunch. And while I'm waiting, I shall count my gold. 1 piece of gold, 2 pieces of gold, some gold, lots of gold.
Giants are not very good at counting, and counting his gold had made the giant really rather sleepy. And so soon, after only counting for a little while, he was lying on his chair and fast asleep. Jack noticed that the giant's wife had left the kitchen, and so he snuck out from the oven. He went over to the table where the giant's gold was, he took the gold, and then he ran from the kitchen, through the castle, out of the castle, across the cloud, and down the beanstalk, and back home to his mother. And they were now rich. They had gold coins. They could buy whatever they want. His mother bought a Bluetooth-enabled scrubbing brush, while Jack had a horse and cart with go-fast stripes on it. But the problem is, if you're not used to money and you suddenly get a lot of money, you may not be very good at spending it, and quite soon all the money had gone. And Jack and his mother were once again facing the chance that they were going to lose their home as they didn't have the money to pay the rent. So Jack had no choice. There was only one thing he could do. He would have to climb back up the beanstalk. He got up the beanstalk and onto the cloud and up to the giant's castle. He knocked on the door and the great door was opened, and there was the giant's wife, who said, "Oh, you're just like that young man who came and visited here a short while ago. You know the strangest thing? He disappeared into thin air, and at the same time as he disappeared into thin air, my husband's gold vanished as well. Very strange mystery. No one's ever solved it. And you are as small as the last young man who visited us, and you surely need something to eat. Come on into my kitchen." So she led Jack through the castle once more and into the kitchen, and he sat down, expecting to have something to eat. But as he was waiting for the giant's wife to serve him something to eat, the two of them heard a voice saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." And the giant's wife said, "Oh no, that's the sound of my husband. If he sees you, he'll eat you up just as quickly as a cheesy quaver. Now, why don't you go and hide in the oven? It's still cold, and then my husband won't see you." So Jack quickly went and hid in the oven and pulled the door behind him and watched through the grating on the door as the giant arrived, saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." And the goose he was carrying honked. But the giant's wife said, "Oh no, dear, that's not an Englishman. What you're smelling there is Welshman. Remember we had a Welshman yesterday for supper? You said he was a bit leaky." And the giant said, "Oh yes, I remember. I'll just sit down here and wait for my lunch. And as I'm waiting for my lunch, I will stroke my lovely pet goose." And he stroked the goose. And as he stroked the goose honked happily. And as the goose honked, it laid a golden egg. And then he stroked it some more, and it honked. And it laid another golden egg. Now, as any of you who own a dog or a cat or a goose know, that if you sit stroking an animal for long enough, you're going to get relaxed and chilled and sleepy. And soon the giant was lying asleep on his chair with the goose sitting on his chest. Now, of course, Jack had seen all of this happen. He'd seen that the goose laid golden eggs when it was stroked. And so, when the giant's wife had left the kitchen to go and get some more supplies, Jack snuck across the room, grabbed the goose, tucked it under his arm, and with it honking, and him then holding its bill shut, he ran out of the castle, across the cloud, down the beanstalk, and back home to his mother. So they now had a magic goose that they could stroke, and it would lay golden eggs for them, which meant that they could have the house Wi-Fi enabled. The scrubbing brush was Wi-Fi connected, and Jack's horse and cart was turned into an electric vehicle. Oh, Jack and his mother had everything they needed. The problem is, of course, if you come into money and you're not used to spending money, sometimes you make poor decisions. And it wasn't long before they had no money left and they were in danger of losing their cottage because they didn't even have the rent to pay for it. And Jack had no choice. He could only do one thing, and that was to climb up the beanstalk once more. So up he went. Up the beanstalk, through the clouds, to the kingdom in the sky. And there was the castle. So he walked across the clouds to the castle door and he knocked at the door. And the giant's wife opened the door. "Oh, hello," she said. "You look just like two young men who we had visiting us a while ago. The strangest things. The first one disappeared at the same time as our gold disappeared. The second one disappeared into air on the same day our goose flew away. But you look so small, you need feeding up. Come on in and I'll give you some food." So she led Jack into the kitchen, and Jack sat in the giant's chair, waiting for some food. But then he and the giant's wife heard a noise. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." And the giant's wife said, "Oh my goodness, that's my husband. Oh, we better hide you, because if he sees you, he'll gobble you up as easily as the Quality Street that's wrapped up in a purple wrapper, and you know how easy it is to eat those." And so Jack once more went and hid in the oven, which once more was cold, I'm glad to say, and he watched what was happening through the bars on the door of the oven. The giant arrived. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." And his wife said, "No, my dear. That's the smell of Scotsman. Remember? We had a light buffet yesterday of Scotsman. You said that the sporran kept getting between your teeth." And the giant said, "Oh yes, I'd forgotten that. Well, I'll just sit down here and listen to my harp singing. Harp, sing for me." And the harp sang to the giant. "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." Now the harp had an easy listening selection, and it being Christmas, of course, he chose appropriate songs for the giant. And soon as the giant listened, "Just like the ones I used to know," the sound of the harp singing made the giant fall faster. Jack had seen everything, and when the giant's wife had gone off to find some more provisions, he jumped out, grabbed the harp, and ran, with the harp singing as he went. "For the treetops glisten," "Shh," said Jack. Jack ran out of the castle, and as he was running, the harp was singing, "Where the treetops glisten and children listen." And Jack said, "Will you be quiet?" And the harp said, "What's wrong? Don't you like my choice of music? Why, I can sing from any decade. How about some 70s Christmas hits?" "70s?" thought Jack. And then the harp said, "It's Christmas!" And Jack looked at the harp and said, "No!" And he climbed down the beanstalk, carrying the harp as he went. But of course, the harp had woken up the giant. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I hear the voice of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my—" "Ooh, what's that there?" And the giant saw the beanstalk, and he started to climb down to follow Jack out of his cloud kingdom. And Jack climbed all the way down the beanstalk, with the harp singing as he went. Christmas time, mistletoe and wine. It had reached the 1980s. Will you be quiet? Said Jack. Children singing Christian rhyme. Will you shut up? Said Jack, jumping to the ground and looking up to see the boots of the giant coming down the beanstalk towards him, and in the boots of the giant he knew there was sure to be the giant. He called to his mother, Mother, quick, get the axe. His mother came running with the axe in her hand. Well, here, I've got the axe, and why are you carrying that harp? Don't worry about that, said Jack. Look up at the beanstalk. His mother looked up the beanstalk, and she saw, coming towards them, down the beanstalk, was the giant. She took the axe and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... She cut through the stem of the giant beanstalk, and as the beanstalk was cut through, it started to... And as the beanstalk hit the ground, from out of the sky fell... the giant. And Jack and his mother blessed the day that they could only afford to rent a small cottage on the edge of a cliff. And Jack and his mother now had a singing harp that luckily had more in its repertoire than Christmas hits, which meant they could go on tour. They could tour the county. They could tour the country. They could tour the European mainland. They could tour the world. And the harp, being the harp, never tired of singing. So we can wish them a Merry Christmas. And we might think about the giant's wife, of course, whose hospitality was abused 3 times, and whose husband is now dead. But let's forget her. Because we can say that Jack and his mother, well, they lived happily ever after. And that's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And that's how I have told it to you.